Welcome back to Maidan a project of hsama.org. We're aiming to create free and open source and informed content regarding Hindustani Common Fencing, but also Indian martial arts as a whole. I say Indian martial arts referring to the Indian subcontinent, that is Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and we may move further outside of that remit depending on what information and evidence we find. So just to go over our goals once again, the goals of hsama.org are decolonising the understanding of historic South Asian martial arts through a combination of methods, and to understand how uniquely South Asian weapons lead to uniquely South Asian strategies. And the goals of this Maidani Amal project are specifically about Hindustani Common Fencing, so we're trying to demonstrate the historically widespread, continuous joint understanding of a certain strategy of swordsmanship, which we term Hindustani Common Fencing, and we're trying to understand the system of common fencing so we can begin to interpret historic texts which provide strategies on defeating this common fencing. We're doing that through a combination of methods, and so we have in total 4 presentations. One has been released. This is the second, and there are 2 more to follow. These are the long form versions, and short form will be released shortly. That'll be YouTube shorts and Instagram clips and the like. If you'd like any references, this is still relatively accessible, but if you want more academic information, please reach out to us. So we'll be talking about one of our methods of looking at Hindustani common fencing, and that is through physical culture. Last time we covered textual evidence, and so this time we'll be covering how physical culture impacts our cutting mechanisms, and how we should look at the Talwar and the Dal as objects. So this is a painting from around the 1750s, made by a French artist, and it is basically what he calls the Hindustani games. What we're seeing is wrestling and the associated physical culture with it. So up in the top corner you'll see the Hindu push-up. In the bottom left-hand side is what we're most interested in, which is the physical culture of meals and weightlifting. And again, here you can see the meals and wrestling on one side, on the left, and swordsmanship on the right. This painting, I believe, was made by the British in around 1750, although I may be wrong. It's available on the Victoria and Albert website for their museum. In the bottom there, you'll see various training swords and also meals, and so you can see how interconnected these two aspects of Indian physical culture, swordsmanship, and wrestling culture and the use of meals are. So, to talk about physical culture, we need to talk about the current lens of physical culture that is applied to Indian swordsmanship. So much of the focus has been placed on the exhibitionary Mahati or Banethi, which is the sword or staff spinning, and that's used as a physical culture model for historic Hindustani swordplay. It's also called the Wavazi, so you'll see the sword spinning, and it's highly exhibitionary, and it demonstrates weapons handling, and it seems to have gained a large prominence in the subcontinent due to gatherings and festivals, such as Kumbh Mela in Varanasi, and that displays various religious traditions across the region. We also see these objects used at Sikh Nagar Kirtans and Shia Muharram Julus, like processions. And the staff spinning seems to be, rather than an everyday training, an exhibitionary application. I will caveat that there are some applications of these sword dances and large multi-directional flaring that do have practical purpose. So in South Asia, anyone familiar with it will understand the concept of mob riots. So large mobs will gather for ethnic or religious reasons and begin to attack usually a single person. And so having the ability to do these sword dances helps clear out large crowds. And this has historic precedence as well in some accounts of the Pindari, which were essentially roaming bandits that had would loot, especially on battlefields, and so they would choose targets that were easy to loot. And so the importance of sword dances and the like is that you can keep those large crowds away, and so this may be another reason why you see this used at so many subcontinental festivals. In reappraising the physical culture lens, we've proposed an alternative. So we believe wrestling physical culture is a better model and lens for Hindustani swordsmanship because of the historic ubiquity of Akhara and Gurkha, which are the traditional educational institutes. They teach swordplay and wrestling in tandem, and wrestling Akhara still exists in much of South Asia. Wrestling's prominence in historic tradition is also very important, so we see this in not only the Sanskrit Mahabharat, the Mughal Shahnama, the Deccan courts who are from Persia and Bahmani origin, but we also see this in the folk culture of many regions. Wrestling is very important for the daily life even today in modern Punjab and North India, extending all the way to Bangladesh, where it's been studied by even UNESCO to understand how it fits into the social fabric of Bengali society. On the right hand side there, you'll see probably the most prominent Indian wrestler to have ever existed. That's the great Gama Palwan, holding one of the training tools that we'll discuss, which is the Gada. And so we actually have some evidence for this directly, of the Gada being used to train swordsmanship. So Dr. Kamalrup talks about in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Sikh Studies, in the chapter about Sikh martial arts, he talks about the Nahang Sikh tradition and how swordplay was often taught as Gada Vidya, meaning mace knowledge or mace skills. So we'll talk about the Akhara. So the Akhara is the main physical training center of Indian martial arts to modern day, and it still teaches wrestling, which is the oldest Indian martial art with still living lineage. There are very few Akhara that still teach swordsmanship, and that seems to have been with the decline of swordsmanship in general, as discussed in the previous presentation. So the two main exercises practiced with an external implement, similar to a sword being an external implement, are the inward and outward mace swing, and these are practiced for hundreds of repetitions a day. And so we believe these are directly applicable to Hindustani swordsmanship. The reason we believe they're applicable is because of the well-grooved neuromuscular motor patterns that are created by doing hundreds of reps a day. People rely on what they practice, and so practicing those swings for hundreds of reps will get that neuromuscular groove. There are three main implements that we see used. So we see the meal, which is a Persian weighted implement, and that's for developing the strength for pulling pulling over the shoulder for weapons, and also for wrestling. It's very prominent even today in the Iranian wrestling traditions in Iran. And it requires a small step to shift the weight as you pull over the shoulder. This has been studied quite well by Razmafzar and Bayat al-Assad, so I would recommend you go check out Bayat al-Assad for their content. We also have the jori, which is an Indian type of meal, and that requires you to keep the implement close to your neck and shift the shoulders and hips with the feet in place for the inward swing. And finally, we have the gada, which is a uniquely Indian training implement. It can be used one or two-handed, and it requires a strong pull over the shoulder, and it can be used for both an inward and outward swing. So here we have our two swings, and this comes from the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture. So the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture covers lots of different physical culture exercises, including the use of meals and the gada, and also swordsmanship. And so it's been a very good reference tool. And so their inclusion of this content is a good sign that this was also used in swordsmanship Akhara, because they specifically reference these exercises being taught in Akhara at the time. So we've got the inward swing there, in which the implement goes behind the head and swings from the far shoulder to the near shoulder and is pulled over the near shoulder. And the outswing is the opposite, so it starts from the near shoulder and the implement swings over and behind the head over to the far shoulder and is pulled over the far shoulder. And this movement is reversed, but the outswing and the inward swing done with the gada is done in a alternating fashion. So I have a video explaining this, but we'll just quickly talk about the Talwar versus the exercise mace. So the biomechanics of learning to pass the blade around your head and pulling over the shoulder are mimicked and enhanced by the Talwar pommel, as you can pull strongly downward onto that disc. And again, the video I'll show will demonstrate this. We have the two videos for the inward swing and the outward swing, and I'll talk through those. But one thing to make note of is in the image there, if you look at my hand, I do not have to grasp the Talwar too tightly, or even at all. That's a relatively open hand when the sword is behind me, in order to pull it to enable pulling over the shoulder. And this is part of the Talwar's design with the disc pommel, and it enhances that pull over the shoulder because you can pull down not with a closed hand but with the palm of your hand, and that especially the heel, and so you can drive the sword downward and into the opponent if you were to perform the swing. So let's take a look at the two videos. So we'll start with the gada comparison. And here I'm doing what's called the 10-2 swing, going between the shoulders, rather than strongly pulling over the head and pulling around onto the shoulder. And here's a similar swing. This one's more a pull over the head, and you can see the sword being mimicked there too. And so that cut is known as the Behera cut. It's a backhand cut, and it's mimicked quite well in this swing here. The weight drops behind me as the tip of the sword does, and it comes over the other shoulder. And you can see I gain speed with this when using the sword, and that is slower when using the mace. And so that's one of the reasons to train with the mace for this. You get used to moving a heavier implement, and therefore enhance your speed when it comes to the sword. We'll now take a look at the other implement, or the other type of swing. I use a lighter weight one for this instead of the two-handed gada. And so here is the lighter implement. I use a sledgehammer here. It has a weight at the end of a stick. It's a mace as far as I'm concerned. And so you can see the comparison here. This moves inward behind the head and then across. So you can see there that again I gain speed when using the sword. And finally, I'd like you to watch the hand here. The hand is able to open up towards the end, and that allows a stronger pull down. Here I open up the hand. And so again, using the Talwar actually enhances the pull down over the shoulder, and if we were to pull through a target, there would be some resistance there, and so pulling down onto that pommel provides extra force into the tip of the blade. It's something we can't necessarily do with the weighted mace, but the weighted mace helps train that movement with the extra resistance of increased weight at the tip. And so that's the end of our presentation for this week by Maidan, and we'll go into cutting mechanics specifically next week, and how the mace enhances that. But largely we'll be focusing on living traditions next week, and comparing those living traditions to the textual traditions and the physical culture that we've so far discussed. Thank you for joining us, and please check out hsama.org to find out more about the Maidan-e-Amal project. Thanks.